Shaq Fu. You hear two-dimensional fighting game, and you think Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, maybe that one arcade machine that smelled like sweat and cigarettes. You do not think Shaquille O'Neal goes to another dimension to roundhouse kick a mummy, but that is exactly what Shaq Fu is. Wacky Adventures with Shaq on the cover. Released on the 28th of October 1994, which means EA looked at the fighting game boom. Street Fighter 2 is already king. Mortal Kombat is in court. Every company on Earth is vomiting out copycats. EA looks at this and says, we need our own fighter. And instead of inventing their own Ryu, they went, what if we put a celebrity in there? Big, recognizable, marketable. Who have we got? In the mid-90s, Shaq was not just a basketball guy. He was a superstar. He has shoes, ads, rap albums, and movies. Kids know him. Parents know him. Grandparents probably know him because he dunked over their cars. So if you are EA and you want to jump into the fighting game genre fast, you have two choices. 1. Spend years building a deep original IP. Or 2. Point at Shaq and say, he does Kung Fu now. Obviously, they picked option 2. From a marketing angle, he is perfect. He already looks like a boss character. You don't need lore. Why is he strong? Because he's Shaq. That is the lore. Slap his face on the box, giant logo, done. You are selling. Do you want to uppercut demons as the guy from TV? Capcom has Ryu, Midway has Scorpion, EA has NBA All-Star Shaquille O'Neal, who probably could dunk on both of them and beat the shit out of all of them. When kids bought the game, they were not ready for what was waiting for them, because the game has a multi-dimensional adventure, starring none other than Shaq himself. Here's how it goes. Shaquille O'Neal is in Tokyo for a charity basketball game. He should be resting, hydrating, maybe watching some tape, doing anything else but walking around in the random streets of Tokyo and just walking inside a random dojo. Inside is Liotsu, ancient martial arts master, long robe, long beard, zero chill. Liotsu takes one look at him and basically says, you are late. The universe is ending. Shaq came here to sign jerseys, and suddenly, he is the chosen one. Liotsu explains that in another dimension, the second world, an evil mummy sorcerer called Set Ra has kidnapped a child named Netsu. Netsu is not just any kid. He is a walking power bank. Set Ra wants to drain him and use the energy to invade Earth. There are many possible solutions for this problem. A team of mages, a sacred knight, at least one responsible adult. Instead, the universe has decided to send Orlando Magic's ball-dunking, rapping, dancing Shaq. Liotsu opens a glowing portal and tells Shaq that he must go through, defeat Set Ra, rescue Netsu, and then somehow still make tip-off. No time zone chart, no travel plan, just vibes. And well, you know what Shaq does. He walks right in, and inside the portal is Set Ra Wait. I cannot believe this. They could have named the other dimension anything, and the name that they went with is Second World. Yes, Second World. On the other side is the Second World, a fantasy realm full of fighters who all look like they escaped from different games. Everyone has a reason to hate him. Some serve Set Ra, some guard their territory, some just see a giant man in a jersey and think, that looks punchable. Each encounter goes roughly like this. Strange warrior, you will never pass. Shaq. I got Shaq Fu. One of the main enemies is Beast, a monster created from Set Ra's own dark power. Beast is like Set Ra's personal attack dog. If the dog were made of lava and bad attitude, he is there to make sure nobody gets close to Netsu or his master. Meanwhile, Netsu is held somewhere deep in Set Ra's lair, being used as a magical battery while the villain talks about ruling both worlds, as all polite mummies do. Shaq fights his way across the second world, knocking down sorcerers, warriors, and creatures who all talk a big game and then get kicked in the face by a man who technically should be on an exercise bike right now. Finally, he reaches Set Ra. Set Ra gives a long speech about power and destiny. Shaq answers with a traditional ancient phrase, "Let us settle this with some Shaq Fu." Shaq wins. Set Ra is defeated, Nezu is freed, and the second world is safe. Somewhere, an ancient prophecy has to update itself to add the words, "with help from a center in size 22 shoes." Liotsu opens the world again and sends Shaq back to Tokyo. The charity crowd is ready. The game is about to start. The announcer introduces the teams. Then the camera reveals a final surprise. On the opposing team, in full uniform, is Beast, the same interdimensional lava monster, now pretending to be a small forward. So, in one day, Shaquille O'Neal saves another dimension, rescues a magic child, defeats an undead sorcerer, and then has to box out his own boss fight in a charity game. When it actually came out, nobody thought it was the end of gaming. Back in 1994, most big magazines treated it like a perfect, average, slightly odd fighting game. Review roundup from the time put it in that 6 to 8 out of 10 zone. Yeah, it is fine. People praised the smooth animation, the fast pace, and the flashy graphics. For a 16-bit fighter, it looked slick. It moved well. The whole Shaq and Kung Fu game thing was weird, but it was more, that is random, then this is a war crime. Even then, though, the cracks were already showing. Everyone kept saying the same three things. Characters are tiny. They are drawn really small on screen, so every punch looks like two ants arguing. It makes hits feel light, like you're slapping someone with a wet tissue. Controls and combos feel off. If you were coming from Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat, Shaq Fu just felt wrong. Inputs were touchy, chains did not flow nicely, and the whole thing had that almost there, but not quite energy. Story and dialogue are cheese on toast. Even in 1994, people were like, okay, this plot is nonsense. Portal, kid in danger, ancient kung fu guy. Shaq just kind of nods and goes along with it. It is Saturday morning cartoon tier. A few critics did not even bother being polite. Stuff like Next Generation and Entertainment Weekly basically went, it has all the parts of a good fighter, except good fighting, which is brutal, but also not wrong. But they didn't talk about the best part of the game, Shaq fighting interdimensional supervillains. And then the real hit came later. In 1997, Nintendo Power did its 100th issue and made a 10 worst games of all time list. Shaq Fu landed at number 3. Top 3. Bronze medal and failure. Electronic Gaming Monthly also tossed it into a worst games list. And once you are on a list like that, you are cooked. After that, every outlet and every bad games video just kept repeating the joke. Ha ha, Shaq Fu. Worst game ever. The name became shorthand. You did not even need to explain it. You just drop Shaq Fu, and people go, oh yeah, that trash, even if they have never touched it. Then the internet poured petrol on it. Someone launched ShaqFu.com, a tongue-in-cheek site with a mission to find and destroy every copy of the game. That became a famous anecdote. Congratulations! Your mid-tier fighting game is now a religious crusade. At that point, it was locked in. Shaq Fu was not just a bit clumsy, it was the meme failure. Only much later did some retro writers and sites start pushing back. Like, if you strip away the jokes and the lists and the burn all copies thing, what is left is not the worst game ever made. It is a slightly janky, mid-tier 90s fighter with smooth animation, small sprites, awkward controls, cheesy story, and the most cursed branding decision imaginable. The gameplay is meh. The promise is, what if your dad tried to design an anime? That combination is why it dragged from 6 out of 10 all the way into destroy every cartridge. Not because it truly plays worse than every other Kusuge on the SNES, but because Shaq Fu is just an unbelievably easy punchline. So now we know what it is, why Shaq is even in it, and how it went from, yeah, decent enough, to burn this. Actually get into how it feels to play. Because scores and memes are one thing. Standing in the middle of that screen, trying to land a punch as microscopic Shaq is where the real comedy starts. What does it actually feel like to play Shaq Fu? Short answer, like trying to do surgery wearing boxing gloves. Long answer coming up. Gameplay, the part where it all falls over. On the surface, Shaq Fu has everything a 90s fighter should have. Special moves, jump kicks, dashes, projectiles, big dramatic sweeps. The problem is the moment you touch the controller, inputs feel fussy and inconsistent. You can do the same motion twice and get two different results. Quarter circle, nothing. Try again. Accidental special. Try special. Shaq just crouches like he dropped his contact lens. It never quite feels locked in. Hitboxes do not match what the animation suggests. This is the killer. You see your foot clearly slicing through someone's face. The game sees your foot lovingly caressing the air near their chin. Attacks whiff when they absolutely look like they should connect, so every exchange feels slightly wrong. Like the game and the graphics are not talking to each other. Combos are unintuitive. In good fighters, you slowly learn what chains into what. Light into medium, into heavy, cancel into special. You start feeling clever. In Shaq Fu, most fights devolve into scrappy button mashing with the occasional, oh, that comboed, somehow moment. You do not get that feeling of flow, just random success. So it ends up as a B-tier fighter in a world where Street Fighter II already exists. Not unplayable, just clearly a step down from the best, where all the rough edges you might forgive in another genre become very obvious. Difficulty and pacing. Fast but not in a fun way. On top of that, the game is very fast. That sounds good until you realize it is I left the tab open fast, not slick arcade fast. Movement and attacks are quick, but you do not always feel in control. Your character zips around, slides into range, shoots past the opponent. It is like everyone is fighting on ice. The speed exaggerates those bad hitboxes and fussy inputs, so missed moves feel even more ridiculous. Enemies are all over the place. Some story opponents just melt. Others suddenly go full final boss and delete your health bar. There is no smooth curve. It is more like falling downstairs. The AI loves cheap moments, random perfect encounters, instant punishes, weird reads that feel less like smart opponent and more like the game decided you lose now. So instead of thinking, I need to learn this matchup, you mostly think, cool, that was nonsense. Cheesy story and the curse of the celebrity license. Mechanically, Shaq being in the game does not break anything. He is just another fighter with long limbs and some specials. The problem is how loud the whole setup is. Shaq randomly walks into a dojo, gets told he is a chosen interdimensional savior, and he just goes, yeah, alright. Then you are on a fantasy map fighting demons and weirdos to rescue a kid. Nobody stops and goes, why's the Lakers center here? Before each fight, you get stiff one-liner dialogues. Two characters trade generic threats or prophecy nonsense, and then immediately start kicking each other. It is all delivered with total seriousness, which only makes it funnier. You end up with this very earnest, Ancient Evil must be stopped plot stapled onto a 90s sports star brand. So every time the game stumbles mechanically, the whole thing feels even more ridiculous because you are being asked to take it seriously while playing as Shaq in space robes. That is the core of Shaq Fu. Not the worst thing ever coded, but a mid-level fighter with fussy inputs, dodgy hitboxes, awkward combos, messy difficulty, and plot that feels that Shaq was forced into it because he lost a bet. But the development for Shaq is one of the most interesting things. because Delphine really went all in on the Fu part of Shaq Fu. They didn't just say, yeah, make him kick or something, and go home. They dragged Shaq and a bunch of stunt guys into a studio, filmed them doing actual moves, and then traced over every frame by hand. Full rotoscoping, 16-bit motion capture, but with more wrist pain. And because Shaq vaguely flailing wasn't quite enough, they even hired a real kung fu expert to choreograph the animations. So somewhere out there is a very serious martial artist who spent days carefully designing attack chains for a game where a 7-foot NBA star in a shiny costume uppercuts a mummy. Well, Shaq Fu crawled, and so that Keanu Reeves and Cyberpunk could run, because Shaq did it first. And the reason any of this exists, Shaq uppercutting mummies in another dimension, is because Shaq didn't want a basketball game. Delphine originally came in with the obvious pitch. Hey Shaq, you're a famous basketball player. How about, hear us out, a basketball game? Shaq, who was apparently deep into Mortal Kombat at the time, wanted to do fatalities in his games. And the rest is history, folks. So the entire project swerved from NBA Live Shaq Edition to Shaquille O'Neal falls into a magic portal and starts doing kung fu on aliens. Somewhere there is an alternate timeline where this is a perfectly fine 16-bit sports game, and instead we got Shaq Fu. And this is the universe I want to be in because anything else is too boring. Also, here's the fact that's gonna make you feel like the purchase at the time was one of the best decisions, because for one purchase, you got to see Shaq in 3 forms. Shaq as a martial arts hero, Shaq's fantasy isekai storyline, Shaq yelling at you over a beat. Wait, what's that last one? Oh, they took it above and beyond. Just in case Shaq in another dimension doing kung fu wasn't enough for you, some US Genesis copies literally came with a Shaq rap single in the box. If you grabbed the right version, you didn't just get a fighting game. You opened it up and boom, cartridge, manual, lore about mystical kung fu, and a CD single of Stand and Deliver, a bonus track from his album, Shaq Fu, The Return. Superman 64. If Shaq Fu is a mid-game that got bullied into worst ever status, Superman 64 is the kid who walked into class filled with high school kids wearing a Superman costume. Superman 64, or if you want to be formal, Superman, The New Superman Adventures, is a 1999 Nintendo 64 game where Lex Luthor traps Superman in a virtual reality version of Metropolis. On paper, it sounds amazing. You are Superman. You fly around a full 3D city. You save Lois, rescue your friends, and punch classic villains in the face. It should be pure superhero wishful fulfillment. In reality, it is mostly 3 things: flying through endless rings against a brutal timer, in a city buried under thick green kryptonite fog, which is really just the N64 going, I cannot render this, please stop. And all of that with controls that make Superman feel less like the Man of Steel and more like the man of slamming into buildings. One of the questions that keep bothering me is, why? Superman 64 exists the way it does because of a bunch of separate bad ideas collided at the same time. You've got Titus, a mid-sized company, grabbing the Superman cartoon license when nobody else in the big publisher world really wanted it. Warner apparently kept asking them if they were sure, and Titus just kept saying yes. So the whole thing starts not because the industry desperately needed a Superman game, but because one studio put its hand up when the room was quiet. Their original dream was actually solid. Big open 3D Metropolis on N64, free flight, all of Superman's powers, proper superhero fantasy. For late 90s hardware, that was insanely ambitious, but at least the direction was correct. They were trying to make you feel like Superman, not like a courier with a cape. Then the license team walked in with a bucket of rules. New people at Warner and DC started laying down lines like, Superman cannot hurt real people. Please do not destroy buildings. Send us everything for approval. Which is basically like asking a Call of Duty dev to make a pacifist gardening game. Superman's entire brand is, I can punch tanks. Titus suddenly had to make a game about an indestructible god who was not allowed to scuff the paint. Their solution was pure survival. They declared the whole thing a simulation. That is why the game is set in a virtual metropolis. If everything is VR, Superman is only beating up holograms and robots. The brand guidelines stay happy, and nobody has to animate civilians going to the hospital. Finally, marketing pressure kept the whole thing alive. The N64 needed big, safe, kid-friendly games on the shelf. Superman from the TV cartoon in a chunky box looks like a perfect birthday gift. Parents see the logo, not the frame rate. The brand was strong enough that the game had to ship, even if it was held together with fog and hope. When the kids got their controllers ready for this game, all excited to play as their favorite Man of Steel, fly through Metropolis and punch bad guys in the face, the hype was through the roof. Then the game started, and they were met with the rings of death. So let's boot this thing up, see how it goes, and talk about what the kids actually had to go through. Because here is the wild part. On the back of the box, Superman 64 sounds almost respectable. Lex Luthor, with a little help from Brainiac, builds his own evil metaverse. He creates a full virtual reality version of Metropolis, then lures Lois Lane, Jimmy Olsen, and Professor Emil Hamilton into this fake city and locks them in. It is a prison and a weapon at the same time. If Superman wants to save them, he has to enter Lex's world, where Lex controls everything. Superman, being Superman, says yes. He steps into VR Metropolis and instantly, you can tell this place is wrong. The whole city is wrapped in thick green kryptonite fog. In the story, that is Lex's trick to weaken him and keep him under pressure. Every street, every building, and every weird distortion is under Lex and Brainiac's control. They can change the rules whenever they want. That is the core idea. In the real Metropolis, Superman is free. In Lex's fake Metropolis, Superman is on a leash. Inside this virtual city, Lex spends the whole time acting like the world's smuggest dungeon master. He keeps popping up to taunt Superman and set up new tests. He announces a fresh threat to Lois, or Jimmy, or Hamilton, and then forces Superman to respond under tight conditions. The goal is not just to win. Lex wants to humiliate him. He wants to prove that if he rigs the world hard enough, even the Man of Steel can be made to look useless. Brainiac is the architect behind all of this. He is the one running the systems. The security, the traps, the glitches, the general Windows 95 and hell energy. VR Metropolis ends up feeling like a mix of Lex's cruelty and Brainiac's cold logic. A city designed by a petty egomaniac and administered by a robot who hates joy. As Superman pushes deeper into the simulation, the program starts spawning big villains from Superman, the animated series. Mala, Metallo, Parasite, Darkseid, and Brainiac himself. They show up as high-level obstacles baked into the world, constant reminders that every corner of this place is stacked against him. Nothing here is neutral. The whole city is weaponized. The kryptonite fog and the artificial nature of the city are the story's built-in excuse for why Superman never feels like he is at full power. Inside VR, Lex and Brainiac get to tune the environment like a graphics menu. Turn down his strength, turn up the pressure, throw in another threat. The whole point of the simulation and the story is to keep him off balance and prove that if you own the rules, you can cage even a god. Now that is the in-universe explanation. Outside the story, VR is doing a very different job. The virtual setting is basically a bandage over a bunch of real-world problems. The people handling the Superman license were not thrilled about a game where you blast real civilians and blow up real buildings. So putting everything in a simulation keeps it technically safe. He is not hurting people, he is just hitting digital assets. The brand team can breathe. On top of that, the Nintendo 64 could not handle a huge, detailed open city with a long draw distance, so they smother Metropolis in thick green fog, call it kryptonite gas, and pretend it was always part of the plan. The console is gasping for air, and the script is standing there saying, no, it's lore. So VR is pulling double duty. Inside the story, it lets Lex and Brainiac play God with Superman. Outside the story, it lets the game dodge license rules and hardware limits, while pretending every weird restriction is just how the simulation works. The takes at least are simple. If Superman fails, Lois, Jimmy, and Professor Hamilton stay trapped in a hostile simulation run by two of his worst enemies. If he succeeds, he shuts down Lex's virtual prison, frees his friends, and proves that even in a world designed to limit and mock him, he still drags everyone out and ruins the villain's science project. You didn't just put Superman 64 in the console to play a game. You put it in because you wanted to be Superman. Full 3D Metropolis, the animated series logo, that music. As a kid, you see that, and your brain goes, I am about to lift cars and throw Lex into the sun. What you actually get is Lex Luthor making you fly through hoops. Literally. Here's what the game really does to you. Gameplay structure. Superman 64 is a 3D action game built around two types of sections. First, the ring stages in the city. You spawn in Metropolis. Lex barks a line, and you're forced to fly through a long chain of floating rings on a harsh timer. Miss too many, you fail. Start again. These are framed as Lex's tests inside the virtual world, but they play a driving exam in the sky. Technically, you're in an open city, but in reality, you're glued to a glowing tunnel. Second, the indoor VR missions. These take place in boxy offices, bases, and labs. You walk or fly through corridors, hit switches, use consoles, carry bombs or hostages, and occasionally punch some goons. Objectives sound heroic: stop bombs, rescue people, protect NPCs. But most of it is find the right room. Find the right thing. Don't drop the civilian like a shopping bag. Controls and abilities. On paper, you've got a lot. You can fly, punch, pick things up, and throw them. And sometimes use powers like heat vision or freeze breath. In practice, flying is oversensitive, like steering a jet with a shopping trolley wheel. Tiny stick movements send you veering off. On the ground, movement is stiff and awkward. So you go from too slippery to too sticky, with nothing in between. Landing and turning feel clunky, so you constantly overshoot rings, doorways, and objectives, or faceplant into walls. Most of Superman's iconic powers are limited by pickups. You don't just have heat vision. You grab a floating icon, use it a bit, then it's gone. It makes Superman feel less like a god and more like a guy renting his own abilities by the minute. Combat is bare bones. Short-range punches against simple enemies. Hit detection is unreliable, so you often swing next to someone and nothing happens, or get tagged by attacks that barely look like they touched you. Graphics and the kryptonite fog. Visually, the game's signature feature is the thick green haze over everything. In the story, it's kryptonite fog weakening Superman in VR. In reality, it's the N64's distance fog pushed to the limit to hide how little the console can draw. Buildings and objects pop in very late. You can't see far ahead, which makes flying fast feel cramped and messy. The whole city gets this flat green soup look instead of a big, bright metropolis. The city itself is extremely plain. Boxy buildings with almost no decoration. Hardly any cars or pedestrians. It feels empty, like a test map that accidentally shipped. Character models are simple and clunky. Superman is recognizable, but his animations are rigid and don't sell weight or power. Enemies and NPCs repeat a lot and look generic. Performance and camera. The engine struggles to keep up. Frame rate drops when you fly quickly or when there are more objects on screen. Superman and enemies sometimes clip into walls or get stuck on geometry. Indoors, the camera loves to clip through walls or point in unhelpful directions, especially in tight corridors. Level design. Ring stages. Extremely linear. You must follow the exact ring path in order. Timers are tight, so any control mistake means restarting. The city layout barely matters. You're not exploring, you're following a glowing line. The game brings these stages back over and over with slight variations, which means it feels repetitive and padded. Indoor missions. More structure, but still weak design. Rooms and corridors often look the same, so it's easy to get turned around. Objectives usually boil down to find keycard/switch, open door, stop bomb/escort NPC, with minimal guidance. Important switches and consoles are badly signposted, so a lot of progress happens by wandering until you hit the right thing. Enemy encounters are simple, either almost nothing or a few basic enemies you just grind through. Putting it all together, you've got clunky flying and stiff ground movement, limited pickup-based powers, basic, unreliable combat, repetitive ring trials in a foggy, empty city, confusing corridor missions with weak guidance, and a struggling camera. Critics met this thing at launch like it had personally broken into their house and unplugged their PlayStation. Back in '99, reviews were already calling Superman 64 one of the worst games on the system. The big three complaints came up over and over. The controls felt confusing and unresponsive, especially for flying, landing, and picking stuff up. IGN's reviewer went all in and said the game was so badly executed, it actually damaged Superman's reputation. Imagine being the Man of Steel and getting your public image nerfed by a cartridge. Here is the plot twist, though. While critics were setting it on fire, kids were buying it. NPD numbers at the time showed it charting on the N64 sales list in North America. Titus proudly announced that for a while, it was one of the better-selling games on the console, and that it moved hundreds of thousands of copies. They even claimed that from all the little mail-in registration cards, most kids in that 6 to 11 age bracket rated it as an A-grade game. So you have this weird split reality. Grown reviewers screaming, "This is unplayable," while a bunch of kids went, "I do not care. I can fly as Superman. This rules." Over the next decade, the critics won the long game. As the years went on, Superman 64 became the go-to punchline whenever anyone needed a worst game of all time. It shows up on magazine and website lists, on worst of the decade write-ups, and is routinely called the worst Superman game ever made. Eventually, it even got a Guinness World Record for being the slowest rated superhero game on review aggregators. That is an impressive achievement, just not in the way Titus probably wanted. User reviews on fan sites are almost entirely negative, with titles that might as well be group therapy. People lining up to tell the world, yes, it really is that bad. Modern retrospectives mostly treat it as broken or nearly unplayable, and use the rings, the fog, and the clumsy controls as a case study in how messy late 90s licensed games could get. And yet, it has a cult now. People stream it on purpose. They boot it up for curiosity, for nostalgia, and for content titled, "Watch Me Suffer in This Struggle Party Started by Superman 64." Saw the tears of several gamers all around the world. and Guinness came rushing in to add petrol to the flames. Because Guinness didn't just laugh at Superman 64, they filed paperwork. They gave it an actual world record, lowest rated superhero video game. Not best cape, not most heroic, just bottom of the pile. They used the old game rankings critic average in the low 20s across professional reviews as proof. So all those mags in 1999 weren't just ranting, they were building a legal case. Modern write-ups still point to that record as the neat little bow on its legacy. Ambitious idea, cursed execution, meme for years, and finally, Guinness stepping in to say, yes, officially, this is the one. This is the bad one. Lord of the Rings, Gollum. So far, we've talked about games that are decades old, but let's look at something modern. Let's move to the modern age of gaming. Games are huge, meticulous, and beautiful, with the games from IPs like The Lord of the Rings, Star Wars. So we have Lord of the Rings, Gollum. And somehow, in the middle of all that modern technology and money, we ended up playing as a starving cave goblin chasing jewelry. On paper, The Lord of the Rings Gollum looks exactly like a serious modern licensed game should be. Single player, story driven, no random multiplayer mode, no Gollum Battle Royale. You sneak, you climb, you make dialogue choices, you move through chapters that fill in a lore gap between The Hobbit and The Fellowship of the Ring. It sounds like a respectable narrative project. In practice, it is more like, what if we took the saddest creature in Middle-earth and forced you to live in his skin for 10 hours while he argues with himself? It is also a very modern production. Cross-platform release, current and last generation consoles, PC, all launched in the lovely 2020s with that classic energy of, we can always patch it later. In the 90s, you got broken games and no fixes. Now you get broken games, day one updates, apology notes, and investors asking on calls why the cave goblin is trending for the wrong reasons. And this is not even hiding behind the Peter Jackson films. Daedalic, the studio behind, only had the book rights from Middle-earth Enterprises. So there is no Andy Serkis, no film Gollum face, no reused movie armor. Everyone is based on the novels, filtered through a small German studio, best known for point-and-click adventures, now asked to deliver a stealth action title about a twitchy cave addict. It is like asking a poetry club to organize a wrestling tournament. So yeah, if Shaq Fu and Superman 64 were the awkward teenage years of licensed games, Gollum feels like the midlife crisis. Very serious voice, very serious lore. And then the big reveal is, surprise, you are the weird little guy everyone in the story hates. Because of all the characters in Middle-earth you could build a giant modern game around, they picked Gollum. You have Aragorn, who is literally walking around the world at this time being a ranger action hero. You have Gandalf, who is doing wizard detective work, poking into dark secrets. You have Legolas, who exists purely to do parkour and throw arrows at physics. And Daedalic looked at all of that and said, give me the malnourished cave gremlin who talks to himself and eats raw fish. That is our lead. It is such a wild choice because Gollum's whole personality is that he is cowardly, physically weak, socially painful to be around, and spends most of his life hiding in the dark mumbling about a ring. That is perfect as a side character. As the main character of an entire game, it is not power fantasy. It is iron deficiency simulator. You can almost see the pitch meeting. Imagine a Lord of the Rings game. Nice. Huge battles, maybe the War of the Ring. No, ledges. Lots of ledges, and you are hungry. To be fair, there is some logic hiding in there. Stealth fits Gollum. A morally torn protagonist with an internal Smeagol versus Golem conflict sounds interesting on a whiteboard. A smaller, intimate story set in the cracks between the big events could feel like fancy prestige television. But there is a reason nobody is begging for a Breaking Bad game where you only play that one junkie from Season 2. Some characters are built to support the story, not to carry a marketing campaign on their thin, ring-obsessed backs. So you end up with this very modern, very serious, very expensive adaptation whose main pitch is step into the feet of the most damp, least moisturized creature in fantasy and spend your weekend suffering with him. The Lord of the Rings Gollum finally crawled out of its cave on 25 May 2023. It dropped on PC, PlayStation, and Xbox, with a Switch version promised for later. Behind it was Daedalic Entertainment, a German studio that made its name with point-and-click adventure games like Deponia. Think funny dialogue, hand-drawn art, and lots of use fish with bucket style puzzles. Not exactly the team you picture when you imagine crawling through Mordor in full 3D. Around 2019, Daedalic decided it was time to move up to bigger cinematic 3D projects. No more small screens and talking raccoons. They wanted camera work, cutscenes, and a big license. So they secured rights from Middle-earth Enterprises for multiple Lord of the Rings games. That is a huge step up. One day, you're making cartoon adventures. The next day, you're in charge of Gollum's mental breakdown. On paper, the core idea of Gollum sounds clever. First, tell a story the films only hint at. What was Gollum doing after he lost the ring and before he bumps into the Fellowship again? Where did he go? Who caught him? How did he survive? Second, build a game that matches who he is. He is sneaky, physically weak, good at hiding and climbing. So you focus on stealth and platforming rather than big battles. Lots of ledges, shadows, and tight spaces instead of charging into war like Aragorn. In a pitch deck, that looks smart. Smaller, character-driven story. Lore gap filled in. Gameplay that fits the character. But the road there was rocky. The game was first announced for 2021, then delayed to 2022, then again to 2023. At some point, it stopped feeling like we just need a little more polish and started feeling like this project lives in the delay section. So why does this game exist? Because a mid-sized adventure game studio wanted to level up, grabbed an enormous fantasy license, and tried to do something serious and lore-faithful with it. They aimed for prestige drama in Middle-earth, centered on one tragic, messed-up creature. So what do you actually do in this thing? On paper, Gollum is a third-person stealth platformer. You are not swinging swords or casting spells. You are climbing, hanging off ledges, crawling through vents, and trying very hard not to be seen because one angry guard could fold Gollum like a paper napkin. Most of your time is spent doing very specific goblin chores. You climb along very clearly painted ledges and handfolds. The game never trusts you to just read the environment, so every surface you can grab is loudly marked like a theme park route for sad creatures. You sneak through shadows and tall grass while guards march on very obvious patrol routes. If you have played any older stealth game, you know the drill. Stand behind a box, wait for the guard to turn, move to the next box. Repeat until you reach the objective, or lose the will to live. You throw stones to distract enemies. Not magic stones, just regular rocks. Your mighty toolbox is rock, ledge, and anxiety. Sometimes, if an enemy is alone and not wearing a helmet, you can do a stealth takedown. Helmet equals immortality. Apparently, every now and then the game pulls you into an inner monologue where Smeagol and Gollum argue. You choose which side wins in that moment. Pick the kinder voice or the crueler voice. and sometimes a small event changes. It is like a tiny mortality play acted entirely by one very hungry man. The problem reviewers kept pointing out is that none of this feels fresh. The stealth is very simple. Hide, wait, move when they look away. That is it. The platforming is often clumsy. Jumps feel off. Inputs do not always register cleanly. And you get a lot of deaths that feel like the controller betrayed you, rather than you made a mistake. Think late PlayStation 2 design, shipped into a game where people are used to smooth, forgiving movement. On the technical side, it runs on Unreal Engine 4, which plenty of games use to look great. Here, though, the result is much more modest. The art direction tries not to copy the Peter Jackson films directly, so Mordor, Mirkwood, and the Nazgul look a little different from what people expect. Environments lean hard into brown and gray fortresses, dark tunnels, and murky forests. It fits the tone, but it is not exactly poster material. The bigger issue is that for a game released in 2023, the visuals look old. Textures are low detail, animations are stiff, and the user interface looks like it missed the final art pass and just shipped in temporary mode. At launch, people reported plenty of bugs, crashes, and performance problems across platforms. A lot of critics summed it up as, "This feels like a lower-budget PlayStation 3 or early PlayStation 4 title that somehow wandered into the PlayStation 5 era and hoped nobody would notice." Level design follows the same pattern. You move through fairly linear chapters. Mordor gives you prisons, fortresses, and industrial areas. Mirkwood gives you forests and elven strongholds. On paper, that sounds varied, but in practice, it is a lot of corridor-shaped paths and simple rooms connected in a straight line. Stealth sections repeat the same idea. Guards pacing in loops, you weaving between them. Platforming sections stretch out long climbing routes and jumps between fixed ledges. When it works, it is just routine. When it does not, you get trial and error. Miss a jump because the camera wobbled or the depth was unclear. Fall, reload, do the same climb again. So the high-level picture of Golem's gameplay is simple. It is stealth and platforming, but boiled down to the most basic ingredients, wrapped in very linear levels, with rough controls and dated presentation, all in service of a character who, by design, is not meant to be powerful or fun to inhabit. When does the game launch? What did the critics think? Critics picked the game up like the One Ring, and on Metacritic, Golem sits in the generally unfavorable zone on pretty much every platform, and roundups of 2023 reviews kept putting it right at the bottom. In some lists, it was literally the lowest rated game on PlayStation 5. No, the worst Lord of the Rings game. Worst game, period. The review blurbs all sound like they are describing the same bad dream. IGN boiled it down to dull stealth, bad platforming, and a pointless story. PC Gamer and others said it felt like an early 2000s stealth title that teleported into the present without bringing any of the charm, just the clunk. Many outlets hammered the performance, pointing to bugs, crashes, stiff animations, and menus that looked like they wandered in from an unfinished student project. Digital Trends even went full Tolkien pun in the headline. Not, "You shall not pass," just, "You shall pass on this one," when the marketing line for your game becomes, "Please walk past the shelf." That is not a great sign. Fans did not exactly riot in the streets. They just quietly closed the game, uninstalled it, and went back to pretending Shadow of Mordor was the last Tolkien game ever made. A few hardcore lore enjoyers said they appreciated that it tried to explore this forgotten slice of the timeline. Everyone else bounced off the janky stealth and endless ledges long before the story could whisper, "My precious," in their ear. It did not feel like inhabiting a tragic, broken soul. It felt like failing basic platforming on yet another suspicious plank in Mordor. Then came the apology. Right after launch, Daedalic and Nacon posted a public apology saying they were sorry for the underwhelming experience and promising patches. This is a standard modern gaming ritual. The tower collapses, and somewhere a PR person offers up a sad paragraph to the social media gods. A few months later, a German show called Game 2 reported that this apology text was written with ChatGPT and that the actual dev team was barely involved. Other outlets picked it up, and instantly, the joke wrote itself. You had a game that already felt stitched together with tape and borrowed code. And now, people thought even the "we are sorry" message had been procedurally generated. Nacon denied it later, but the internet had already decided the apology came with an AI-generated watermark. The same investigation also talked about crunch, low wages, and a small team trying to build a big cinematic Lord of the Rings project on a budget that politely whispered, "Please calm down." Too little money, too much scope, not enough time. All classic warning signs of a game that was always going to leave launch day in a body cast. I still say this Lord of the Rings Gollum is everything wrong with modern gaming. E.T., the extraterrestrial. Here's a cleaner version of that E.T. section. So we've done Shaq, we've done Superman, we've done Gollum. Time to visit the original final boss of bad licensed games. E.T., the extraterrestrial, on the Atari 2600. 1982. The great-grandfather of How Did This Get Released? And the game that caused the video game crash, 1993. The setup sounds totally reasonable. Atari lends the license to Spielberg's giant hit, hands it to Howard Scott Warshaw, the same designer behind Yar's Revenge and Raiders of the Lost Ark, and tells him to make the official E.T. game. Huge movie, top designer, biggest game company in the world. This should have been the safest slam dunk in history. You play as E.T., waddling around a tiny maze of connected screens, trying to find 3 pieces of an interplanetary telephone so he can phone home and call his ship. That's the entire job description. Find the bits, assemble the cosmic landline, go back to space. Very early 80s. Clear goal, simple verbs. Something your parents could read off the box and think, "Yeah, I get it." So let's diagnose how this dumpster fire started. After the film blew up in June 1982, Warner and Atari basically saw dollar signs. Biggest movie in the world, plus biggest console in the world. What could go wrong? To lock that dream in, Warner paid a ridiculous amount for the license, somewhere in the 20s of millions of dollars. For early 80s game money, that is, we could have bought a small country territory. The problem is the contract took ages. Legal talks with Universal and Spielberg did not finish until late July. Atari still wanted shiny E.T. cartridges on shelves for December that same year. So the release date was picked first and the development schedule was whatever panic could fit between July and the start of manufacturing. Into this walks Howard Scott Warshaw. He had already pulled off Raiders of the Lost Ark on the same hardware. So Atari goes, "You did Indiana Jones. You can do the Alien too." Then they give him a little over 5 weeks. Not 5 weeks to prototype, 5 weeks to think of the design, code the whole thing, make all the assets, and somehow test it before it goes into mass production. For the Atari 2600, a normal game had several months. E.T. got what is basically the game dev version of Adair. And because the universe was not finishing laughing at them yet, Atari also made a wild manufacturing bet. They produced around 4 million cartridges, the number of Atari 2600 owners in the United States was in that same general ballpark. So the plan was pretty much every other person who owns this console will buy ET. When that did not happen, the returns started piling up. Atari was left with mountains of unsold plastic sadness. Those unsold carts became a perfect symbol later. Overpriced license, impossible schedule, massive overconfidence. By the time the market crashed in 1983, people were pointing at ET like, the game itself is confusing and frustrating, but the business story behind it is pure slow-motion train wreck. So what did kids actually do when they plugged this thing in and asked, how bad can it be? First, the world ET on Atari does not scroll. There is no smooth map. You get a tiny grid of static screens. You walk off the edge of one screen, it hard cuts to the next. That is how it fakes a whole planet. Forest screens, a little city screen, then the famous screens full of pits. It is like a very small open world made out of 6 PowerPoint slides. You start in the forest. From there you shuffle between forest, town, and pit country. The forest is home base. It is where the ship will land when you finally manage to phone home. The city is where humans show up more often, so it feels stressful even before they steal anything. And then there are the pit screens, also known as where your patience goes to die, which hide most of the important items. The core loop goes like this. You wander around, drop into pits, grab stuff, climb out, try not to scream. Pits are just dark circles on the ground. Brush against one, and ET drops straight down. At the bottom, you shuffle around and hope there is a phone piece or some Reese's Pieces sitting there. Because otherwise, you did all that for nothing. To escape, you hold up on the stick and slowly levitate out. Very slowly. This uses energy. If you are not lined up perfectly when you reach the top, you pop out still standing over the pit tile, and immediately fall back in. So you get this comedy loop. Fall in, climb out, fall straight back in. Repeat until you either move 1 pixel to the side or lose the will to live. Reese's Pieces are scattered everywhere as tiny dots. They do 2 things. They give you points and they refill a bit of your energy. So ET is basically living off candy for survival. Sometimes Elliot appears and you can hand him candy to get more energy or a little bonus, depending on difficulty. It is the only time in games where your healer is a child you bribe with chocolate. Meanwhile, 2 human troublemakers roam around like they own the place. The FBI agent is the worst. If he catches you, he just takes your hard-earned phone pieces and drops them back into new pits. All that climbing, gone. The scientist is more of a nuisance. If he reaches you, he drags ET off to a lab screen, which wastes time and energy as you trudge back out to continue the pit tour. Both of them feel less like enemies and more like walking undo buttons. If you somehow push through all that and collect all 3 phone pieces, ET can finally assemble his space Nokia. You waddle over to a specific call zone, use the right power to phone home, then rush to the landing spot in the forest before the timer runs out. Do it right, and the ship comes down, picks you up, and the round ends. Do it wrong, and you are back to roaming again, meeting your old friends, the pits. And that is why the pits become legendary. They are where all the design problems meet in one place. Harsh collision, slow levitation, constant energy drain, and that classic, I climbed out, why am I falling in again? The game wants you down there to find pieces, but it feels like the whole thing is one long slapstick sketch about an alien who cannot stop falling in holes. So let's really nail down what happened to this poor alien. First big twist. E.T. actually sold. Not 3 copies and a pity refund. We are talking well over 1 million carts in that first Christmas rush. Charts from the time have it sitting near the top, right next to the heavy hitters. For a couple of months, E.T. was one of the hottest gifts in America. Grandma did not know what a pit was. She just knew, my grandson likes the alien. The problem was not that nobody bought it. The problem was Atari printed like everyone on Earth was going to buy it. They pushed out around 4 million cartridges. The Atari user base was only a bit higher than that. That is not a business plan. That is a dare. Then reality hit. Kids got confused. Parents got annoyed. Shops got boxes they could not shift. Returns started rolling in. Hundreds of thousands of carts came back. Some reports say millions of them ended up as dead stock. So even though 1.5–2 million sold is huge for the era, Atari still looked at the warehouse and went, cool, we have invented plastic debt. Critics at the time were not doing YouTube meltdown faces yet. They were more puzzled. Some writers called it a loser next to Donkey Kong and Frogger. Too confusing, badly explained, falling into pits every 5 seconds. Others actually trying to defend it. Hard to learn, but worth it if you stick with it. Which is the nicest way of saying, my child cries, but I paid full price. Player polls were mixed too. A magazine reader vote a year later put E.T. near the bottom, but not alone. It was sharing the same shelf with other Atari disasters. Just one more weird game in a sea of slightly broken experiments. Then the 90s showed up and suddenly left the building. Retro lists needed villains. Electronic Gaming Monthly did a big worst games ever list and slammed E.T. straight into the #1 slot. Other outlets copied that. Documentaries repeated it. Websites repeated the documentaries. By the time the internet got involved, the sentence was already written. E.T. is the worst game of all time. And people had reasons ready to go. The pits that suck you in over and over. The map that feels like a bad dream. Objectives that make no sense without a manual and a PhD. Plus the famous made in 5 weeks story, which is true and also sounds like a dare from a cursed monkey's paw. E.T. was so bad, it caused an entire video game crash. That is the legend anyway. The bedtime story. The game was so terrible, they buried it and the industry died. Reality is messier and more boring, but E.T. is still the perfect mascot for how badly Atari drove itself into the wall. First problem? Money. Atari, owned by Warner, pays a ridiculous amount for the license, something in the 20 million range just to use E.T. That is not game design. That is setting fire to a briefcase because the movie was popular. Second problem, time. They then gave Howard Scott Warshaw about 5 weeks to actually make the thing. Design, code, art, testing, all squeezed into the time it takes you to procrastinate on an assignment. The schedule is not a plan. It is a dare. Third problem, plastic mountain. On top of money and time, Atari prints around 4 to 5 million cartridges. For context, that is basically saying everyone with an Atari will buy this right now because Spielberg. In reality, about 1.5 million sell strong over Christmas, which is huge, but you still have millions more sitting on shelves like ET-shaped bricks. Retailers cannot move them. They send them back. Atari warehouses fill up with unsold ET, unsold Pac-Man, unsold consoles. Just stacks of cardboard boxes full of regret. And this is not happening in a vacuum. The market is already a mess. Too many consoles, too many publishers, tons of quality games confusing parents and clogging shelves. Pieces dive into bargain bins because nothing is special anymore. Meanwhile, home computers start to look cooler. You can play games and also pretend you are doing homework. That is a powerful combination. So, did E.T. single-handedly crash the industry? No. The crash was coming anyway. Saturation, garbage quality, price wars, new competition. Atari's own business decisions were already cracking. What E.T. did do was bundle all the worst decisions into one adorable disaster. Huge license fee, ridiculous rush job, wild overproduction, then a confusing, frustrating game where the alien keeps falling into holes. That is why historians say E.T. did not cause the crash. It is just the poster child. But the ending gets more fun because Atari decided to take one of the funniest choices in the video game industry. Because after all that corporate chaos, Atari looked at its warehouses and went, right, we have two options. Option 1, admit we messed up. Option 2, bury the evidence like a cartoon villain. They picked option 2. This was not one sad intern rolling a trolley into a bin. It was a proper emergency clear-out. Warehouses full of returned carts, unsold stock, and hardware nobody wanted. Keeping it around costs money. Dumping it normally meant people could fish it out and resell it, which would be like your own trash coming back to haunt your shop shelves. So Atari decided to wipe it from existence. They chose a landfill in Alamogordo, not for drama, not because Lex Luthor owns New Mexico, just because it was practical. Their distribution and returns pipeline already ran through that part of the Southwest, and the landfill rules let them bury stuff fast with limited fuss. Small city, small press. Quiet job. Back to business. That was the plan. Then it leaked. And here is where the legend mutates. People already wanted one big villain for the crash, so the dump became attached to one game in everyone's head. Over time, the story got polished into a perfect punchline. Millions of ET cartridges buried in the desert. It is clean, it is dramatic. It sounds like the industry got cursed by a tiny alien, and for decades, it sat in that half-real, half-campfire zone. Gaming folklore. People swore it happened. Other people swore it was an urban myth. Then the excavation happened. A film crew got permission, dug the site up on camera, and pulled out crushed carts and hardware, including E.T. And what happens next is the funniest part. Some of the carts went to museums, because now they are not trash. They are history. Like we are all living in a timeline where a landfill has museum-grade artifacts. Others got auctioned off, because collectors will buy anything if the backstory is good enough. Atari tried to erase them. The world turned them into souvenirs. Ride to Hell. Retribution. This thing drops in the early teens, right near the end of the PS3 and Xbox 360 era. So the console generation is basically packing its bags, waving goodbye, and then this game barges in like a drunk uncle at the farewell party, yelling, "One last ride, lads." Not a tiny indie, not a cheap download experiment, proper boxed game energy, mid-budget grit, big boy shelves. It is made by Technics, and that name matters, because these guys were racing game people. NASCAR stuff, Ferrari challenge, cars go vroom, players go left, job done. So naturally, someone at the studio looked at that resume and said, right, let us do a third-person biker revenge epic with shooting, fistfights, motorcycles, and cutscenes full of sweaty macho drama, which is like hiring a wedding photographer to direct Mad Max. Deep Silver published it, which checks out, because they love that gritty, grimy, slightly unhinged vibe, Dead Island energy, later, Saints Row Chaos. So Ride to Hell is meant to be their tough guy biker movie game for the era. Leather, dust, bars that smell like regret. American 1969. But not History Class 1969. More like Grindhouse Poster 1969. The kind of world where every road has a skull on it and every town looks like it was built by a cigarette ad. Tech-wise, they were using Unreal Engine 3. That is a solid engine for that era. Everybody used it. It can do guns, punches, vehicles, explosions, all the usual toys. So if the game looks rough and stiff, that is not the engine going, "Sorry mate, I cannot." That is the team going, "We tried our best, and our best was this." And the story is simple. Vietnam vet Jake Conway comes home, tries to live life, finds his brother Mikey dead, thanks to the Devil's Hand biker gang, gets shot, survives, and flips into full revenge mode. So the whole plot is basically, guy with trauma rides around knocking heads until the gang is gone. Classic pulp setup. It could have been a cool, dirty action game if it had the chops. But the real reason this game is here in our lineup is because it aims big in every direction at once. Driving, shooting, brawling, cinematic storytelling. All from a studio whose comfort zone was laps and leaderboards. So you can really feel the wobble. A racing studio trying to make a full-action adventure is like watching someone juggle chainsaws after only practicing with oranges. Why Ride to Hell even exists, and why it crawled out of the cellar in the state it did. Back in 2008, this was not meant to be the bargain bin gremlin we know today. The pitch was huge. Full open-world biker GTA thing. Big desert towns, long highways, proper sandbox chaos. Deep Silver Vienna was on it with Eutechnics, and Vienna had ex-Rockstar people. So you can see where the confidence came from. They were aiming for the whole cinematic package too. Fancy concept art, proper story, mocap cutscenes, the works. It was trying really hard to be cool, like wearing a leather jacket indoors hard. Then the lights went out. Around 2010, Deep Silver Vienna gets shut down. Staff gone, support gone. The game vanishes off websites, misses its window, no updates. Everyone pretty reasonably goes, "Yep, this is dead. R.I.P. Biker GTA. Pour one out." Except it was not dead. Not fully. More like a zombie in a garage. Eutechnics kept poking at it in the background. But the big dream was not happening anymore. Budgets got chopped. The co-dev studio was gone. The open world plan was now a fantasy. So what do you do when you have half a giant game and someone upstairs suddenly wants a release? You salvage. You stitch. You pray. So, by the time it resurfaces in 2013 as Retribution, it is no longer a sandbox. It is a linear game made out of leftovers of a sandbox. You can feel it in the bones. Little road bits that look like they used to connect to something bigger. Narrow levels that feel like fenced-off chunks of a wider map. Even that tiny hub town, Dead End, looks like a place that was meant to be a real city until someone put a padlock on the door and said, "Sorry mate, budget says no." Try to wander out, and the game just fades you back like an awkward nightclub bouncer. That is why it came out broken. Not because someone woke up and went, "Let us make a disaster." It is because a big open world biker epic got its legs kicked out. Sat in limbo for years. They got Frankenstein into something that could be shipped. Alright, so now that we know this thing was stitched together out of a dead open world, let us talk about why playing it feels like chewing tinfoil. Ride to Hell has an identity crisis the size of a Harley engine. It wants to be a road trip biker fantasy, a cover shooter, and a punchy beat 'em up all at once. And instead of picking a vibe and making it good, it keeps swapping costumes mid-fight, so every part feels half done. First, the bike sections. These are meant to be the cool bit. wind in your hair, outlaw energy, freedom on the highway. What you actually get feels like a theme park ride where the track is hidden under the asphalt. The road looks wide, but the game does not let you breathe. You are shoved down a narrow corridor and told to pretend you are steering. You are not riding a bike. You are babysitting a cutscene that sometimes lets you lean left. Then it sprinkles in quick-time punches on the bike, which is hilarious, because instead of fighting with speed and spacing, you are playing Simon Says at 50 miles an hour. Press this now, press that now, miss it, and you explode. So every chase has the same rhythm, not because the road is exciting, but because the prompt timer says so. And the checkpoint punishment is the cherry on top. You clip a lamppost because the collision box is drunk, and boom, back you go. So the game trains you to ride like you are taking your grandma to the temple, in a game that is supposed to be about being an unhinged biker menace. Nothing says outlaw like carefully avoiding a fence because the physics might sue you. Then you get off the bike and the game tries to be two different combat styles at the same time. You are in arenas that want to feel like a shooter, with cover and guns, except the enemies do not play shooter rules. They stand in the open, run at you like they lost their bus pass, and barely react. So cover becomes decorative, like a sofa you're never meant to sit on. And the melee. This wants to be a crunchy brawler, but the hits feel weightless and inconsistent. You swing, the game shrugs. Sometimes it connects, sometimes it does not. Sometimes you are punching air next to a guy, and he falls over out of pure politeness. There is no rhythm, no feedback, just scrapping in a parking lot with boxing gloves made of clouds. So combat ends up not tactical like a shooter, and not satisfying like a beat-em-up. It is just noise. A messy bar fight where everyone forgot why they are angry. And then there is that little hub town. You can feel the ghost of the open world here. Streets keep going. Buildings sit there like they were meant to matter. It looks like a real place that should open out into the world. But it is tiny. Walk too far, and the game fades you out and drops you back like a parent dragging a kid away from a toy aisle. It is not just annoying, it is sad. Every invisible wall is basically the game whispering, "Remember when I used to be bigger?" Now stack the technical mess on top of all that. Controls and hit detection are shaky. Targeting is loose. You try to punch someone and Jake logs onto the nearest lamppost instead. Quick time prompts feel mistimed. So even when you do the right thing, it looks wrong. That kills trust. If your inputs do not feel real, nothing else can feel real. And the bugs are not rare little gremlins. They live in the furniture. Animations pop around. Characters slide. Physics freak out. People clip through walls like they are trying to escape the game too. Once your brain spots that, the world stops feeling like a place and starts feeling like a broken action figure playset. Visually, it does not help either. Even for its own era, it looks tired. Flat lighting, stiff models, empty environments. Levels are long corridors with nothing in them except enemies and regret. You can tell there was meant to be more life here, but the budget and the limbo years sucked it dry. And then we hit the writing and tone. The revenge plot itself is fine. It is a grindhouse setup that could work, but the dialogue is bland and the delivery is dead. So the story becomes background noise instead of gasoline. And the way it treats women is where it stops being just bad and starts being embarrassing. Women are not characters here. They are props, rescued, used, and handed out like loot drops. The repeated sex scenes feel transactional, like the game is patting you on the head, going, "Good job, champ. Here is your reward." It is not edgy. It is juvenile. like a teenager trying to write a tough guy movie after watching one episode of Sons of Anarchy and panicking. And because the game is already janky, those scenes land even worse. You are watching stiff, awkward animations trying to be sexy or gritty, and it plays like accidental comedy. The tone does not just fail to save the game, it actively makes it harder to defend. The reviews. Well, the title explains how the reviews, Ride to Hell Retribution, did not get normal bad reviews. It got reviews straight from hell. Metacritic slapped it with overwhelming dislike, and the averages dropped into the teens depending on platform. That is not a couple of grumpy outlets being dramatic. That is the whole review ecosystem holding hands and chanting nope. And when you zoom into individual reviews, it gets even funnier in a bleak way. GameSpot hit it with a 1 out of 10. That score is basically their emergency button. Their reviewer called it a hideous, slapped-together action game where almost everything is broken, and even picked out the voice acting and writing like they were personal enemies. GameSpot had only used that bottom score once before for big rigs, so giving Ride to Hell the same badge is them saying, yes, this is that kind of disaster. Welcome to the club. Your locker is on fire. Eurogamer also gave it a 1 out of 10. When two big outlets independently go straight for the floor, it is not a hot take anymore. It is a public service announcement. Game Informer went even harder in spirit. Dan Rickard basically said, unless you count motion control games that literally do not function, this was the worst thing he played in that whole console generation. That is not a casual insult. That is a guy looking at the entire PS3 and Xbox 360 era and going, this one gets the crown. The crown made of rust and shame. Giant Bomb crowned it worst game of 2013. And those guys are usually pretty forgiving if something is messy but interesting. For them to pick Ride to Hell over everything else that year, it means the game did not just fall. It fell through the roof and kept digging. So why the unity? Why did everyone agree so fast? First, it felt unfinished. Not weak, not clunky. Unfinished. Reviews talk about broken controls, collision, AI, animation, scripting. Like the game is held together by duct tape, and the duct tape is also buggy. Second, it felt outdated even for 2013. Critics kept saying it played like something a decade old trying to sneak into a modern console party. And that matters because 2013 was packed with polished third-person action games. Ride to Hell walked in looking like it got lost on the way to the PS2 launch. Third, and this is the killer, the tone was not edgy. It was offensive. The misogyny and the weird sex scene-esque reward structure made critics actively uncomfortable. So the conversation shifted from this is a bad game to why did a major publisher think this was okay to ship? It is not just broken, it is embarrassing. So yeah, Ride to Hell did not just get dragged, it got quarantined. And that brings us to the afterlife of Ride to Hell, which somehow is still louder than the game itself. This thing did not get a slow redemption arc. No cozy little, maybe it was misunderstood phase. It dropped, exploded, and everyone agreed instantly that it belonged in the Hall of Shame. That immediate consensus is why people still bring it up. It was stamped all-time disaster on day one and never escaped the label. What makes the legacy stick is how many different ways it face-planted at the same time. Some games are janky but have charm. Some are tasteless, but at least play well. Ride to Hell said, why choose? And failed in every lane. So now it lives as a benchmark. When people talk about development hell, rushed salvage jobs, or publishers publishing out something that should have been quietly taken behind the shed, Ride to Hell is one of the default examples. It is a cautionary tale with leather pants, and there is a specific tragedy baked into it. This was meant to be a big open-road biker fantasy back in 2008. Then studios shut down, budgets shrank, years disappeared, and by 2013, it was a cheap linear patchwork built from leftovers. You can feel that collapse in every corner. It plays like a skeleton of a bigger game that never got to be born. Now for the fun extra weirdness. Because, of course, this game has lore outside the game. First, the Route 666 leak in 2025. Footage from an unreleased spin-off called Ride to Hell Route 666 leaked online. And the funniest part is not that it leaked, it is that it never existed. Deep Silver really thought this mess might become a little franchise. The leaked build had menus, tutorials, playable chunks. It was far enough along that someone, at some point, believed in it. Then Retribution's reviews happened, and the sequel plan evaporated faster than Jake Conway's dignity in a cutscene. Second, marketing versus reality. Even when the final game was clearly linear and fenced in, the story pages still sold it like a free roamer biker freedom fantasy. Open roads, big world, live the outlaw life. And then you boot it up and realize the open world is a narrow hallway with a motorcycle skin. It is like buying a safari tour and then being handed a shopping cart in a parking lot. Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. Alright, Whiplash time. We just left a biker apocalypse, so now let us apparate straight into wizards with PTSD. Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1 drops in November 2010, right next to the first Deathly Hallows movie. Classic movie tie-in move. Studio sees the film hype cooking and goes, yeah, throw a game in the oven too. Same smell, same release window, maybe someone buys both. Easy money, right? But here's the twist. This was late PS3 and Xbox 360 era, the age where every big game wanted to be a cover shooter. Doesn't matter if you're a Marine, a cowboy, or apparently a traumatized teenager holding a wand. If a game came out back then, it probably involved hiding behind waist-high objects like your life depended on IKEA furniture. So EA Brightlight, the main dev team for the HD consoles and PC, tried to reinvent Potter for an older crowd. Less Hogwarts sightseeing, more Warzone vibes. They basically looked at the final book and said, "This is not school anymore. This is a chase movie with spells." So the game becomes third-person shooter energy. Over-the-shoulder camera, aiming reticle, pop out of cover, fire spells like they are bullets that glow. Which is a massive pivot from the earlier Potter games. Those were about wandering Hogwarts, finding secrets, doing puzzles, vibing in a magic boarding school. This one is about being hunted, running through forests, and blasting Death Eaters because apparently the wizarding world discovered Gears of War and thought, same thing. Also, this was not one single game. EA split it by platform like a stressed parent cutting a pizza for too many kids. The HD version on PC, PS3, Xbox 360, Wii, that is the serious cover shooter makeover. The Nintendo DS version was built by Full Fat, and it is a different beast. Simpler, more handheld friendly, less cinematic war shooter. Mobile was handled by EA Romania, basically a tiny pocket-sized remix for phones that were still trying to figure out what apps were. So if you ever hear people arguing about this game online, half the time they're not even talking about the same version. One person is remembering a wand shooter, another is remembering a DS adventure. Everyone is confused. It is like three people describing the same dream, and none of them match. EA published the whole thing, with EA Mobile doing the phone side. This was their last big Potter push before the movie saga closed shop. So they went wide. PC, consoles, handhelds, phones. If your device could turn on, there was probably a Deathly Hallows logo stamped on it. Tone-wise, they leaned dark. The main HD game even got a teen rating. First time a mainline Potter game went that far. Not because it suddenly became Saw, but because the vibe is heavier, more combat, more running for your life, less butterbeer. Story-wise, it follows the first half of the Deathly Hallows film. Harry, Ron, Hermione leave Hogwarts, go on the run, start hunting Horcruxes, while Voldemort takes over the world like a bald dictator with no hobbies. Early EA Potter games were built on one core fantasy. You are a kid at Hogwarts. You wander around. You learn spells like a normal student. You mess about with Quidditch. Combat is there, but it is not the point. The point is the castle, the vibe, the feeling that you live in this world. Then Deathly Hallows shows up in the books and films and goes, cool, school is over. Everyone is wanted. The vibe is war. Nobody is attending charms class. Nobody is petting owls. You are sleeping in wet tents and dodging fascists. EA looked at that shift and said, all right, we are matching it. Their marketing was basically screaming it, packed with action start to finish. You are on the run, fighting for survival. No more lessons, no more training. Translation: stop expecting Hogwarts Simulator. This is Wizard Panic mode now. And once they made that call, they made another one right behind it. They rebuilt the main console and PC version in the language of the hottest genre at the time: cover shooters. Everyone loved cover shooters in that era. If you were not hiding behind a chest-high wall in 2010, were you even a video game? So now the camera sits tight behind Harry's shoulder like you are about to breach a room. You aim properly. You do not just auto-lock and wave your wand politely. Fights are designed around rubble, door frames, broken walls. You crouch, peek out, fire a spell bolt, tuck back in. Your wand is not a wand anymore. It is a magical rifle with feelings. Why do it this way instead of making some big fancy wizard combat system? First reason is simple. Shooter culture was king. This was late PS3 and Xbox 360. If you want a holiday, tie in to sell to teens who are already playing war shooters all day. You speak their language. Same rhythm, same pacing. Just swap bullets for spells, and call it a day. Second reason is tone. Part 1 Harry is not powerful or playful. He is hunted. He is outnumbered. He is tired. A cover shooter naturally gives you that feeling of being pinned down and desperate. It sells the story of guerrilla wizard warfare better than a floaty adventure system would. That also explains why the main version went teen rated. They wanted the vibe to feel heavier. But of course, there was a price for this swap. When you turn Potter into a shooter, you trade away the old identity. A cover shooter wants tight arenas and constant pressure, so levels become corridors and combat rooms instead of magical spaces you wander through. You feel less wonderful, more treadmill. And magic changes too. In the old games, spells felt like discovery. Here, they are loadout, stun, blast, shield, distract. Useful? Sure. But it turns wizardry into a toolkit, not a sense of learning. You're not growing into a wizard. You are selecting ammo types for your wand gun like you are picking attachments in a menu. PC, PS3, Xbox 360, Wii, Core Combat. The main console and PC version was a hard shift into a third-person shooter format. EA Brightlight explicitly redesigned the series to suit an older audience and built combat around an over-the-shoulder camera and manual aiming. which is why people called it a shooter with wands. Camera and control feel. The camera sits tight behind Harry's right shoulder almost all the time. This does two things. 1. It narrows your field of view, which makes fights feel more tense and warlike. 2. It forces you to aim spells like projectiles, not like auto-lock magic from earlier Potter games. Movement is standard for the era. Left stick or WASD to move. Right stick or mouse to aim. That aiming is not cosmetic. It is the core skill of the game. Spell wheel and spell rolls. Spells are chosen through a radial spell wheel, again mirroring shooter loadouts. Instead of learning spells slowly in school, you already have a combat kit and you swap based on the situation. Reviewers and the manual describe each spell as a different combat tool. Stupefy and Expulso are your basic rapid-fire attacks. Confringo is a stronger explosive option for groups or cover clearing. Impedimenta and Petrificus Totalis are crowd control and stop tools, slowing or freezing enemies so you can reposition or finish them. Protego is a magical shield that works like active defense when you are not behind cover. Wingardium Leviosa lets you grab objects and throw them, basically turning the environment into grenades or barricade removers. Confundo temporarily flips an enemy to fight for you, and is even used in a scoped sniper style section, which shows how shooter-coded the design was. Expecto Patronum is a situational anti-dementor tool, used in specific counters rather than general combat. Cover system and destructible cover. Cover is not optional. The game is built around arenas full of waist-high objects and walls. You press a button to snap to cover, lean out, fire, then duck back. Enemies fire back with their own spells, and parts of your cover can break under sustained hits. So fights play like a loop of staying safe, poking out, switching spell types, and moving to the next piece of cover when yours falls apart. This is one of the biggest reasons it feels closer to Gears of War than to early Potter games. Headshots. Because you aim manually, the game adds headshots as a reward for precision. If you place a spell directly on an enemy's head, they drop faster. That is a very shooter-specific idea. You are being trained to treat spells as ballistic hits with weak points, not as cinematic duels. Items and potions. You pick up potions and magical items during levels and trigger them quickly with the D-pad or hotkeys. They function like shooter consumables, quick healing, short buffs, or stealth helpers. The game wants you to stay in combat flow instead of pausing to manage inventory. Progression system. There is a light RPG layer where Harry earns experience and you upgrade spells for more damage, stronger effects, or longer durations. It is not deep, but it reinforces the warframing. You are not a student learning. You are a fighter getting sharper as the hunt goes on. Stealth segments. Stealth is the second pillar. The manual and gameplay section highlight Polyjuice Potion, Peruvian Instant Darkness Powder, and the Invisibility Cloak as the main stealth tools. How stealth actually works. When you use the cloak, a stealth meter appears. Move too fast and it creeps into red, meaning enemies are about to spot you. If it hits red, you must stop and let it recover. So stealth is about pacing, not just crouching. If you get close to an enemy while cloaked, you can silently stun them or body check them with a shield bash style melee. How levels are structured. Levels alternate between combat arenas against Death Eaters and Snatchers in forests, roads, and Ministry-inspired environments. Short stealth runs where you avoid patrols or sneak through occupied spaces. And a few set-piece creature fights, like Dementor sequences. This switching is meant to keep variety, but many critics felt the game still leaned too heavily on repeated firefights, challenge mode, and side content. Outside story chapters, the HD versions include challenge-style combat scenarios. Think of them as bite-sized arenas for score or practice, separate from the plot. Connect mode on Xbox 360. The Xbox 360 version adds a separate Connect package. Multiple previews and the fandom entry note there are 22 Connect missions total, split into 10 single-player and 12 co-op. How Connect missions play? They are on-rail shooter missions. The game moves you through a path automatically, and you cast by moving your arms and body for gesture-based spells. Co-op is 2 players standing side by side, blasting waves of enemies for high scores that post to Xbox Live leaderboards. Why Kinect was included? 2010 was the launch window for Kinect, and publishers were stuffing gesture modes into big titles to show the tech off. Potter was a perfect fit for the sales pitch of wave your arms to cast spells. So the Kinect missions work like a separate arcade attraction stitched onto the base game rather than something that affects the main campaign. Let us talk about how this whole wand shooter experiment went down once people actually played it. First clue is this: it reviewed poorly on almost everything. And when every platform is grumpy, you cannot just point at one messy port and go, "Oops, wrong build." That means the main idea itself was wobbly. The core game was the problem, not one unlucky console. Look at the spread. The big HD versions on PC, PS3, Xbox 360, Wii, all sitting in the same sad neighborhood on Metacritic. That is critics collectively going, "Nope, this is not it." Meanwhile, the DS versions float higher, not because it is secretly amazing, but because it is doing a different job, smaller scope, simpler style, easier to excuse. It is not trying to be Wizard Gears of War for 10 hours straight. So the handheld getting a softer landing basically proves the point was the risky part. Then you get the individual reviews, and they line up like a firing squad. GameSpot sits in the middle and says, "The shooting could be fun, but the story's side does not hit." That is such a specific kind of disappointment. They are basically saying, the wand gun part is serviceable, but it does not feel like Deathly Hallows. Like someone handed you a decent shooter and then stapled a Harry Potter cutscene pack on top. IGN went way lower. And that is not them being dramatic for clicks. When IGN dumps a tie-in that hard, it usually means 2 things happen at once. 1. The gameplay got boring fast. 2. It felt clunky while doing it. So they are not just mad about the adaptation. They are saying the shooter idea does not even work as a shooter. If the whole point of your game is combat, and your combat feels like homework, you are cooked. Game Informer lands around the same vibe as GameSpot, but with more heartbreak. Their Quidditch faceplant joke is basically the review in one image. Starts with some momentum, then immediately eats grass. You can feel the arc they are describing. First hour, hey, this is new. Next few hours, wait, this is the same room again, with the same spell bolts, against the same waves. Cool, I guess. Even the Wii review that is kinder still says, "Nice try, but nah." And that is a platform where critics often give bonus points just for showing up and functioning. If the Wii version is still only lukewarm, then you know the flaws were loud. Why were they all saying the same thing? Repetitive combat. This is the big murder weapon. Because the game is basically combat now, so if combat gets stale, there is nowhere else to hide. And stale here means the fights loop the same way every time. Same wave structure, same arena rhythm, same objective. Clear the room, move to the next room, clear that room. After a while, you stop feeling like a hunted wizard. You feel like a guy working night shift in a spell factory. Basic linear levels. Linear is fine when it has flavor. Here, it is linear and bland. Corridors into arenas. Arenas back into corridors. Not much to discover. Not much to break up the pace. Earlier Potter games had you roaming and poking around like a kid in a giant magical playground. This one is like, welcome to War Tunnel. Please take cover behind the convenient waist high rock that has clearly been placed there for your safety. Story beats feel rushed. This is the shooter tax. When most of your runtime is firefights, the story becomes a pit stop, a quick cutscene, then back to another wave. But Deathly Hallows Part 1 is supposed to breathe. It is fear, isolation, paranoia, the trio slowly falling apart. The game turns that slow burn into constant firefight energy, so the emotional spine just does not get room to land. What people did like, the darker tone, that part, most critics respected. They agreed the series needed to grow up here. The war vibe makes sense. The mistake was thinking war vibe automatically equals endless cover shooting. Tone was right. The method was questionable. It is like nailing the funeral atmosphere, then hosting the funeral inside a paintball arena. Now, quick detour to the Nintendo DS version. Because this thing is basically the alternate timeline where EA remembered the DS is not a tiny PS3. They did not try to cram the big console wand shooter into a handheld and hope for the best. Instead, they went, alright, what is the DS actually good at? 2 screens, stylus, small spaces, sneaky little levels. So the DS game becomes its own creature. Top screen is your brain. It is just a live map sitting there like a GPS for wizards. Enemies, exits, objectives, all glowing away. Because on a small screen, you cannot rely on vibes and cinematic camera sweeps. You need actual information. So you are always planning, always plotting. It makes the whole game feel more like a stealth puzzle than a shootout. Bottom screen is your body. Harry runs around in a small top-down world. Fixed camera, no drama, clean and readable. You are not a hero in a movie. You are a rat in a maze, which honestly fits Part 1 perfectly. And the stylus control changes the mood completely. You drag the stylus to move Harry. That means you are not twitch aiming. You are issuing commands like a stressed-out chess player. Point there, hide there, scoot behind that thing before the guard turns around. It slows everything down in a good way. It feels tactical, not frantic. Combat is the same deal. You tap a spell, tap an enemy, done. So, fights are about positioning and choices, not about perfect aim. It is less Gears of Potter, more Harry Potter, and the panic clicking of Doom. Ron and Hermione also get turned into stealth gadgets. Because the DS is not letting you swap between 3 people mid-chaos without your hands falling off, Hermione and Arresto Momentum is basically your freeze button. Crowd control, buy time, slip past, classic stealthy friend energy. Ron with the Deluminator is even better. He literally turns lights off so you can sneak. That is such a handheld design choice. Not flashy, not shooter cool, just practical sneaking like a burglar in a school play. And then they toss in multiplayer because it is the DS. And every DS in that era had to go, hey, do you want to ruin your friendships locally? One player is Harry, scrambling around collecting magic points. The other player controls Dementors, trying to corner him. So it becomes a tiny cat-and-mouse horror game. And for once, that hunted vibe of Deathly Hallows actually lands without needing huge cutscenes. You are not fighting war arenas. You are running for your life. That is Part 1 in a nutshell. Now, the mobile versions. These were never trying to be equal. Phones in that era could not do a big 3D wand shooter without melting. So EA Romania made a simpler 2D companion thing. Short levels, basic spell attacks, less story, more loop. You play it on a bus, feel mildly wizardly, then forget it existed 5 minutes later. It is not a crime, it is just a product. And that ties into the bigger business picture behind all of this. EA had this game penciled into their roadmap early, before the marketing even woke up. That tells you it was a business lock. Film is coming, game must follow. No negotiation. Wizard capitalism does not sleep. The official announcement lands right as the movie hype machine ramps up, because once the trailers hit, the tie-in game has to be in the same airspace, even if it is still half-baked in the oven. They also marketed the darker war tone hard. That is them telling fans, this is grown-up Potter now. No school year. No spell homework. You are in the trenches. So the shooter pivot was not an accident or late panic. It was the selling point. They even scanned the movie actors for faces this time. Not stylized, not close enough, proper film look. Because if you are making the final stretch of a mega franchise, you cannot show up with Bargain Bin Harry, who looks like he fell off a PS2 box, and the quietly sad epilogue. EA Brightlight, the studio that basically carried the Potter games era, shuts down not long after. So these Deathly Hallow games are not just the finale of the books and films. They are the finale of EA's whole Harry Potter factory line. Last hurrah. Last one-shot. Simpsons Road Rage. Simpsons Road Rage is not like the other Simpsons racing game, which is good. This one is actually ass. Simpson Road Rage show up in the early 2000s, right when the PS2 was doing that thing where it swallowed every franchise alive. It dropped on PS2 first, then wandered over to Xbox and GameCube, and later a tiny Game Boy Advance version crawled out too. Different teams, different builds, same mission. Cause chaos in Springfield with a taxi and zero respect for road safety. The real magic is not the driving. The driving is fine. Simple. You turn, you boost. You bounce off a mailbox like it owes you money. What people loved was the vibe. You are not some random cabbie. You are a cabbie in Springfield, which means every passenger is already annoyed before they even get in. And Radical did the smartest thing possible. They got the actual voice cast, so every pickup feels like an episode. Homer's yelling. Bart is being Bart. Marge is disappointed in you spiritually. Even when you are driving like a drunk shopping cart, the game keeps cracking jokes at you, and that is half the sale. Also, this thing was made fast. Like, fast. About a year. Which explains why the whole game is basically one delicious loop stretched for all it's worth. They had time to build a Springfield playground and a taxi system. They did not have time to build a whole second game around it. So they leaned into what works. Arcade rush, constant yelling, funny lines, go again. Now, here is where the eyebrow raise comes in. Because Road Rage is not just inspired by Crazy Taxi. It is Crazy Taxi wearing a Simpsons mask from a party shop. Same idea. Pick someone up, race the timer, drive like morals are optional, drop them off, get paid. Repeat until your thumbs fall off. Even the big glowing arrow telling you where to go is basically a photocopy. Sega had that arrow patented. And when they saw Springfield doing it too, they went full courtroom crusty. They sued Fox, EA, and Radical, saying, "Lads, that is our taxi chaos. Stop nicking it." The case never exploded into a big public trial. It quietly got settled behind closed doors for some mystery amount. So legally, nothing dramatic happened. But culturally, it locked in the name forever. The Simpsons Crazy Taxi clone that got sued. And here is the funny part. Everyone knows it is a clone. Nobody cares. Because the theme is doing all the heavy lifting. People were not buying it for originality. They were buying it to drive through Springfield, smash into Chief Wiggum's car, and hear him scream about it. It is like ordering a pizza you have already eaten 100 times. You are not here for innovation. You are here because you like pizza. And this one has Simpsons jokes on top. And honestly, it worked. It sold well. People had fun with it. And Radical basically used it as Springfield driving school. A couple years later, they took everything they learned here and made Hit and Run, the bigger, proper, open Springfield game everyone remembers. This story setup is basically a Simpsons-sized excuse to justify the crazy taxi loop. And it does a couple of smart things, even though it is paper thin. First, it picks Mr. Burns as the villain because he is the cleanest, greedy rich guy ruined Springfield button the show has. You do not need a long cutscene to understand why this is bad. If Burns buys public transit, everyone instantly assumes it will be corrupt, cheap, and toxic. So the game gets to skip real explanation and jump straight into chaos. Second, the radioactive buses detail is not random. It is a quick gag that also raises the stakes. Burns is not just making a profit, he is literally poisoning the town. That makes the player feel justified in doing illegal taxi work. In Simpsons logic, if the system is evil, the town is allowed to respond with something equally stupid. Third, making every citizen an illegal taxi driver is the important part for gameplay. It explains why the roster is huge and why the vehicles are ridiculous. It is not just Homer driving a taxi. It is literally the whole town turning into a black market cab army. So you can play as anyone and drive anything, and the story still fits. Fourth, the money goal sets up a simple arcade motivation. You are not saving the world. You are grinding cash to buy back the transit system. This is a very sitcom-style objective. It is small, local, and kind of petty, which matches Springfield. The game does not need a dramatic ending. It just needs a reason for you to keep doing runs and raise enough money to take Burns down. It's a neat loop for that. Finally, this setup fits the show's tone because it is a city-wide meltdown over something very ordinary. In real life, a corrupt bus system leads to complaints and protests. In Springfield, it leads to instant taxi anarchy. This exaggeration is the joke. The game is basically saying, of course, this is how Springfield handles public transport problems. And then it lets you play inside that joke. Alright, so how does road rage actually feel when you are holding the controller and pretending you are a responsible member of society? You pick a driver, pick a car, and the game goes, cool, here is a passenger. Here is a giant arrow screaming where they want to go. Now drive like you have just remembered you left the stove on. You can take any route you want, which in Springfield means lawns, sidewalks, playgrounds, the occasional innocent fence. Ratings tick down while you drive, so every tip turns into a tiny panic attack. Drop them off fast, get paid. Grab the next fare before the clock eats you alive. If you stack enough cash, you unlock more characters, more cars, more places to start causing civic damage. Simple loophole, dangerously addictive. Like chips at 2 in the morning. There are 2 flavors of this chaos. First is road rage mode. This is pure arcade energy. Pick up, drop off, repeat until time runs out. No plot, no mercy. Just you chasing money targets while Grandpa yells something that sounds like he is suing you. Second is missions mode. This is where the game tries to be a Simpsons episode that accidentally got turned into a driving test. 10 little challenges spread across the maps. Stuff like helping Krusty escape the mob, or sneaking Homer to work like he is a criminal mastermind, or letting Barney live his best drunk life while you try not to flip the car into a lake. Finish the whole set, and you unlock Homer's stupid custom car from the show, which is the closest the game gets to saying, "Congratulations, you survived Springfield. And yes, there is split-screen multiplayer. 2 players, same passengers, same timer. Instant betrayal. You will steal your friend's fare. They will ram you into a wall. And by the end, you are both shouting like you are in a real taxi union dispute. It is couch co-op, but with emotional damage. The world itself is chopped into 5 Springfield areas. Each one has its own layout, traffic vibe, and shortcuts you learn through trial, error, and repeated property destruction. The roster starts with the main family, then opens up into a pile of favorites like Mr. Burns and other regular weirdos. And the glue holding it all together is the voice work. The actual cast is back, and every pickup comes with a little line that sounds exactly like the show. That banter is doing a lot of heavy lifting, because without it, you might notice you have done the same run 20 times. With it, you're like, yeah, cool. Let me hear Lisa roast my driving again. And then Sega showed up at the party and had to be stopped. Because yeah, Road Rage was not just similar vibes. Sega looked at it and went, hang on, this is our taxi homework with your Simpsons name written on it. So they filed an actual lawsuit, not a salty tweet, not a passive-aggressive interview. A real court case against Fox, EA, and Radical. Basically the whole family. Their big weapon was a crazy taxi patent. And if you have ever wondered what it looks like when someone patents a video game idea, it is exactly this. Sega's patent covered the whole magic trick. Drive around a city where roads are more like suggestions. Follow a massive arrow in the sky telling you where to go. Have pedestrians leap out of the way so the game can say, look mom, no manslaughter. All the stuff that makes Crazy Taxi feel like Crazy Taxi. And then they pointed at Road Rage and said, lads, you have done the same thing. Same passenger delivery loop. Same floating arrow yelling at you. Same free roam driving like sidewalks or optional content. It was not, this reminds us of our game. It was, this is our game wearing Homer's shirt. They even dragged reviews into it like receipts. Critics were already calling Road Rage a shameless clone. And Sega basically went thank you for the evidence. Appreciated. Straight into the folder. What did Sega want out of this? 2 things. They wanted the game pulled off shelves, and they wanted money, because Road Rage had sold like hot donuts by then. So Sega was not suing for moral satisfaction. They were suing for a chunk of the pie. But the courtroom drama never got its big season finale. No trial, no judge giving a monologue about arrows. It got settled quietly in mediation. Confidential deal. Everyone goes home. Lawyers buy new cars. Which means we will never know how far Sega could have pushed that patent if it actually went to the mat. And that is why this whole thing still hangs around Road Rage's neck like a neon sign. Whenever people talk about patenting gameplay, this is one of the poster children. Not because it set a legal rule, it did not, but because it shows how real and how messy it can get when a game copies another one so hard that the original owner starts swinging paperwork. So how did Road Rage land when it dropped? Did the critics rage? Critics did not throw it in the bin. They also did not frame it like the second coming of driving games. It sat right in that comfy middle zone. High 60s, low 70s. The classic licensed game score. Fun if you love the show, fine if you didn't. Nobody is tattooing it on their soul. And the reason they were nice about it was not because of deep mechanics. It was vibes. Pure vibes. First, it is fast. Like, instantly fast. You start driving, grab a fare, floor it, crash into a mailbox, and still somehow feel cool. That arcade loop is so simple, your brain gets it in 2 seconds. Even viewers who clocked the cloning were like, yeah, okay, this is still fun in short bursts. Second, the Simpsons flavor actually works. They got the real voice cast. So every pickup feels like a micro episode. Homer screaming, Bart being a menace. Mr. Burns sounded like he is offended by oxygen. The jokes are tiny, but the delivery makes them land. Critics kept saying the voice lines were the main reason to play, because if you are a Simpsons fan, half the joy is just hearing Springfield yell at you while you drive like a lunatic. Third, driving through Springfield is a nostalgia cheat code. The graphics were not amazing, but the town feels familiar enough that fans love just roaming around and treating traffic laws like evil propaganda. You're not memorizing street names. You're thinking, wait, that is Moe's. That is the power plant. That is definitely the road where Homer should not be operating a vehicle. It is comfort food. But that middle score also makes sense because the flaws were loud. The biggest one is obvious. It is Crazy Taxi with a yellow coat of paint. Not inspired by, not loosely based on, copied with a tracing paper and no shame. Next Gen called it design burglary. And honestly, fair. The Simpsons skin is fun, but it does not add new DNA to the loop. You are doing the same thing, just with more donuts. Then there is the handling. A lot of reviewers complain the cars feel slippery and oversensitive. You drift wider than you mean to, clip a corner, lose your chain, and suddenly the whole run goes from chaos comedy to mild rage. In a game built on momentum, anything that messes with control hits hard. Visually, it also looked a bit flat. Textures were mushy. Environments dull. Frame rate wobbly when traffic got busy. Crazy Taxi has that clean arcade shine. Road Rage feels like the budget version you buy at a petrol pump. Still tasty, just cheaper ingredients. And long-term, it did not have depth. Critics liked the first hour, then started saying the loop runs out of tricks. Missions are funny, but not mechanically wild enough to keep things fresh forever. So the praise often came with a very specific vibe. Good for a weekend rental, not a lifelong obsession. Now, here is the fun part. Mixed reviews did not matter at all. This thing sold brilliantly. The PS2 version alone cleared about 1.6 million copies in the US by the mid-2000s, pulling in serious money. Worldwide totals flat around a few million, which makes sense. The Simpsons in 2001 was still a cultural bulldozer. People were not buying it for innovation. They were buying it because it let them live in Springfield, drive like an idiot, and hear the cast roast them for it. Road Rage was the first time a console game let you just drive around Springfield in proper 3D. Not a tiny minigame Springfield. Not a menu background Springfield. An actual place you can smash into. Radical built it quick, so it is not massive or fancy. But it did two big things. First, it proved they could turn the show into streets. You load in, and your brain goes, yep, that is Quickie Mart. That is the power plant. That is the road where Homer should not be trusted with wheels. Recognition does half the work. The town feels like Springfield because it is shaped like Springfield in your head. Second, it gave them the tech homework. Even a clone needs a city that works. Traffic, shortcuts, districts, routes that feel fun to cut through. Road Rage is basically the practice lab where Radical learns how to make Springfield drivable without it falling apart in 5 minutes. Then Hit and Run shows up, and you can see the glow up instantly. Hit and Run did not start as some totally new brainwave. It grew straight out of Road Rage. Late 2001. Same studio, same idea at first. Springfield driving again, just bigger. And then someone in the room went, wait, if we are going bigger, why are we still doing taxi chores? So they pivoted into a Grand Theft Auto style setup. Missions, on-foot bits, collectibles, a proper continuous town. Road Rage walked, so Hit and Run could sprint into a lamppost at full speed. You can even spot the family resemblance in early material. Old models and assets from Road Rage floating around in hit-and-run builds like leftovers in the fridge. Then they get upgraded as the new game becomes its own thing. So why did we never get Road Rage 2? Because the first one already had a giant neon sign over it saying, "This is copying Crazy Taxi," review said. Sega sued over it. Even with the lawsuit settling quietly, nobody wanted to press their luck by making another one that looked like a sequel to someone else's patented idea. And also, Radical did not want to be trapped making the same arcade loop forever. Road Rage was the proof of concept. Hit and Run was the real ambition. So Road Rage is not the classic. It is the rough draft. It is the game that proved a 3D Springfield was fun to mess around with, that the voice cast could carry a whole experience. The fans wanted a bigger sandbox in that world. Hit and Run is the payoff. Road Rage is the warm-up act that accidentally became important, like the weird pilot episode of a show that later turns legendary. Alright, switching cartridges. New chapter. Mortal Kombat decides it is bored of punching people in a line and wants to go on an adventure. So we get Mortal Kombat Mythologies. Sub-Zero in 1997. A spin-off where Midway looks at their ultra-violent fighting series and goes, what if, instead of a tournament, we do a side-scrolling action adventure? You know, jumping over spikes, climbing platforms, bonking enemies in the face, and occasionally stopping to remember you are still Sub-Zero and not Mario with frostbite. You play as Bi-Han, the original Sub-Zero, back when the lore was still fresh and everyone was slightly less undead. This is basically Midway trying to say, hey, these ninjas have lives outside the arena. They have jobs. They have beef. They have origin stories that are not just show up and uppercut. It launched first on PlayStation, then slid over to Nintendo 64 later. The Nintendo port had to trim some presentation because cartridges were tiny and stubborn. So if the PlayStation version is the full meal, the Nintendo one is the same dish but served on a smaller plate with less garnish. This was also the first Mortal Kombat game that is not a 1 versus 1 fighter. Before this, every MK release was the exact same deal. Pick a character, punch another character, rip out a spine, roll credits. Mythologies was the first real try at expanding the universe into other genres. A big swing, a risky swing. The kind of swing you take when you think your brand can't do anything. Visually, it is also the last time the series uses that classic digitized actor look. Real people filmed, turned into sprites, moving like slightly haunted arcade mannequins. After this, MK goes full polygon. So Mythologies feels like the final breath of the old school arcade era, just shoved into a different type of game. Why did Midway make a spin-off at all? Simple. MK was huge by then, and they wanted to stretch it like comics do. Give characters their own stories outside the tournament frame. Mythologies was meant to be the start of a whole prequel line, not just a weird one-off experiment. And why Sub-Zero first? 2 reasons. 1. John Tobias was clearly interested in Bi-Han's backstory and wanted to build him up for the newer lore that was coming. 2. Sub-Zero is a safe bet. He is a top-tier poster boy. If you are going to test the waters with a new genre, you do it with a cool ice ninja everyone already likes, not with some deep-cut background goblin. But here is the part that explains why it feels rough. The team was tiny. Think a handful of artists, a couple of programmers, and one sound guy holding the whole thing together with caffeine and prayer. They built it fast while the main crew was also cooking up the next big fighter, so the ambition is high, but the polish is not. It is like trying to build a mansion while also grilling burgers in the backyard. Something is gonna get burned. Midway even planned more Mythologies games for other characters, a whole sub-series. Then reception hit. Fans went, "Nice idea, but nah," and the line got quietly buried. Not in the desert like E.T., just in a filing cabinet marked, "Maybe do not do that again." So yeah, Mythologies Sub-Zero is Mortal Kombat's big genre experiment right at the tail end of the classic era. Alright, story time. This game is basically Mortal Kombat saying, what if we explained why Bi-Han is like that? And then throwing him into every cursed building on the map. We start with Bi-Han already in full murder employee mode. He is not a chosen one. He is not trying to save anyone. He is Lin Kuei property, a walking invoice with ice powers. This matters because the game is not pretending he is secretly nice. He is a professional killer first, everything else second. The moral compass is in the bin from minute one. Then Quan Chi shows up with the world's smarmiest job offer. He does not hire Bi-Han because he believes in him. He hires him because Bi-Han is useful. Quan Chi is that guy who never gets his hands dirty. He just hands you the mop and watches you slip. And surprise, that is literally his whole personality across the entire series. First stop, Shaolin Temple. Bi-Han storms into holy ground like it is a random warehouse. Beats up monks and steals a map. Casual, like robbing a church because you need directions. This is the first little spark that says, yeah bro, you are not the hero. Two assassins, same hallway, same contract. Bi-Han kills him with the emotional rage of a stapler. Not personal, just efficient. Which is exactly why Scorpion's revenge later goes from zero to eternal fury. Imagine dying because a guy had a better schedule than you. You would haunt him too. After that, the game widens out into full myth mode with the Temple of Elements. Suddenly, it is not just ninja business. It is, welcome to the supernatural obstacle course. Bi-Han fights elemental guardians because apparently his job description now includes kick the concept of fire in the face. The point here is to show he is not just a back alley hitman. He can walk into magic nightmare zones and still win. So later, when gods start blaming him and throwing him into hell, it does not feel like a random power mismatch. He is built for this nonsense. Then comes the amulet twist. Quan Chi sells the mission like it is some sentimental trinket job. Yeah, just grab my necklace, mate. And Bi-Han, legend that he is, does not ask questions. He steals it, only for the story to go, surprise! It is Shinnok's amulet, aka the nuclear launch code of evil artifacts. So, Bi-Han accidentally helped start a cosmic disaster because he took a contract without reading the fine print. Classic Mortal Kombat. The apocalypse always begins with someone doing a side quest. Raiden shows up and immediately blames Bi-Han, which feels unfair because Quan Chi is the gremlin behind the curtain. But Raiden is basically HR for Earthrealm, and he loves blaming the guy on the ground instead of the guy running the scam. It also shows how tiny Bi-Han is in the bigger chessboard. He is powerful, but to gods, he is still a pawn with good footwork. Then we hit the Netherrealm arc, which is the story going, okay, consequences now. Bi-Han gets trapped in hell as punishment for all the sacred temple robbing and amulet theft. And who is waiting down there? Scorpion. Now as a specter, because apparently killing a guy for work comes with a free lifetime subscription to being hunted by him. Quan Chi keeps doing Quan Chi things. He throws his own assassins at Bi-Han like disposable cutlery. Kia, Jataka, Serena, fight them, survive them, keep moving. He is protecting himself by using people as speed bumps. Shocker. But here is the one interesting crack in Bihan's ice wall. He spares Serena. One moment of restraint. One tiny, maybe I do not have to kill every breathing thing. And because of that, she helps him. It is the game quietly saying, look, he is not pure evil, just extremely committed to being terrible at empathy. Finally, he confronts Shinnok, gets the amulet back, and hands it to Raiden. Not a big victory lap, more like finishing a horrible errand so the next game can happen. This is prequel glue. It is setting up MK4 and proving that a massive war can start because one cold assassin did his job too well. Now here's why actually playing Mythologies feels like trying to eat soup with a fork. Midway did not make a clean action platformer. They made a Mortal Kombat fighter, then tapped some ladders and spikes onto it and said, go on then, explore. So your controls are still pure arena fighter brain. High punch, high kick, low kick, block, run. The special move inputs that want quarter circles and back forward stuff. That is fun when you are in a flat tournament stage staring at one guy. But Mythologies puts that whole keypad circus inside a side-scrolling level that wants you to jump cleanly, react fast, and not fall into the lava every 5 seconds. You are basically trying to do MK combos while also doing platforming homework. Your thumbs are filing a complaint to HR, and the game doubles down on that identity crisis. It has a combo experience system, so it actively rewards you for chaining hits like you are in a proper versus match. Except enemies do not behave like match opponents. They shove you. They spawn near cliffs. They wander into traps like idiots. So you are trying to juggle someone for XP, while the level itself is lining up a slapstick death for you. It also gives you an ice meter for specials. Cool idea. Bad timing. You are already thinking about spacing, traps, jumps, combos, and which direction you are facing. Then the meter runs dry right when you need a freeze. And suddenly, Sub-Zero feels less like a ninja and more like a guy who forgot to pay his electricity bill. Then there is the level design versus MK physics problem. The stages are long gauntlets full of instant death pits, spikes, collapsing floors, swinging nonsense, and enemies whose main hobby is politely knocking you into all of that. But Sub-Zero still moves like he is on a fighting game stage. Stiff acceleration, slight float, attacks that lock you in place. In a fighter, that is fine. In a platformer, it is a crime scene. You go for a combo, get tapped, slide backwards, and the pit says, hello. You try to adjust mid-jump and he turns like a truck on ice. Which, yes, is funny because he is literally ice-themed. But it is not funny the 12th time. And now we arrive at the most cursed decision in the whole game. The turn button. You do not press left to face left. You have to hit a dedicated button to flip around. So when an enemy pops up behind you, the flow is not react and fight. It is stop, turn, then remember what decade you are in. In a one-on-one arena, maybe you could defend this. In a platformer, where things attack from both sides, and you are balancing on ledges, it makes the game feel like you are fighting your own spine. You get hit because you are facing the wrong way. Then you die because you hit turn a fraction too late. It's like playing with shoulder pads glued to your hands. Now the PlayStation versus Nintendo 64 thing. Both play the same. Both are clunky. The difference is vibe. PlayStation gets full live-action cutscenes. Cheesy MK theater. Quan Chi hamming it up. Raiden lecturing like a disappointed uncle. Bihan brooding in real human form. It feels like a proper Mortal Kombat product. Those scenes are basically your little reward snacks between punishments. Nintendo 64 loses most of that because cartridges cannot hold the film stuff. So you get still images, text, trimmed sequences, thinner sound. The game is still just as mean, but now your prize for surviving is a PowerPoint, the reception. And this is where methodologies hits the reception wall, because it comes out doing that classic spin-off gamble. New genre, same logo, everyone arguing at once. When a series jumps lanes like this, reviewers basically run two tests in their head. First test, does this work as the kind of game it wants to be now? Second test, does this still feel like Mortal Kombat, and not just Sub-Zero starring in some random side-scroller? Mythologies somehow manage to annoy both camps, but in different ways. This is why the reviews looked like a family group chat on Diwali night. Some critics were into it because the ambition was obvious. Mortal Kombat had mostly been tournaments and duels. Suddenly, here is a prequel road trip through temples and realms, digging into the lore the fighters never had room for. For people who love the universe, that felt like finally getting to read the footnotes in the MK Bible. And the presentation helped. The digitized actors, the chunky violence, the live-action cutscenes. The whole thing still smelled like classic MK. So even if they were climbing ledges instead of uppercutting someone into spikes, the vibe was still there. Those reviewers basically went, okay, this is messy, but at least it bleeds Mortal Kombat. Then the other half of critics actually had to play it for more than 5 minutes. And this is where the game starts swinging at your kneecaps. The controls were slow and weird for what the levels demanded. A platform adventure needs turning and movement to be automatic. Your brain should be thinking about jumps and enemies, not about which way your shoulders are pointing. The turn button adds this extra beat to every reaction. Like the game is politely asking you to fill a form before you are allowed to punch someone. In a trap-heavy side-scroller, that delay is basically a death sentence with paper. Then you stack that on top of levels that are brutal in the wrong way. Hard is fine. Hard can be legendary. But hard has to feel fair. Here you get blind jumps, traps that pop like cheap pranks, and pits waiting right where knockback will send you. It teaches you nothing except memorize the map and pray the controls cooperate. So instead of feeling challenged, you feel mugged. This is why the frustration became the louder story over time. At release, some people still gave points for trying something new. Years later, nobody is impressed that MK tried a side-scroller. They just ask, is it fun to play now? And the answer is usually a long sigh, followed by someone falling into a pit again. Also, later Mortal Kombat games got way better at telling lore without making your thumbs suffer. So replaying mythologies today is like looking at an old-school project you were proud of at the time and realizing you misspelled your own name on the cover, which brings us to why people still talk about it. Because its legacy is weirdly split down the middle. Lore-wise, it is a foundation stone. Even if you hate the gameplay, the story work is real. It gives Bihan an actual life before the tournaments, makes the Scorpion tragedy hit harder, and locks Quan Chi, Serena, and Shinnok into the main mythos as proper pillars. People revisit it the way you revisit a rough early comic that introduced a key villain. You might not enjoy the issue, but it explains half the universe. Design-wise, it is a cautionary tale, not because platformer spin-offs are bad, because they tried to drag fighter DNA into a genre that needs totally different muscles. Fighting games assume a flat arena and strict spacing. Platformers assume flow, instant turning, and responsive jumps. Mythologies never rebuilt those systems to match the new body, so they collide instead of blending. And Midway read the room. The idea of character-led prequels was cool, but this specific execution got them roasted. So, the Mythologies line dies right there. One game, one cold ninja, one very focused control scheme. Let's talk about the most recent thing here. Not because Mythology suddenly woke up and became a secret masterpiece. It is still the same game that used to slap you off a ledge and then ask why you are crying. The difference now is access and framing. Legacy Collection. Legacy Collection is basically Digital Eclipse doing their museum tour routine again. You do not just get the old games dumped in a folder like forgotten homework. You get timelines, interviews, old art, and a guided, here is what Midway was cooking back then vibe, and Mythologies being there as a punchline. For years, it was that weird PS1 and N64 cousin you mentioned for lore, but you do not actually invite the parties. Now it is sitting in an official modern compilation right next to the big boys, like it always belonged there. Digital Eclipse is not pretending it was flawless. The whole point of these collections is, here is the full Mortal Kombat story, even the bits where Midway tripped over its own ice line. So, Mythologies gets treated like a historical chapter, the first real, what if Mortal Kombat was not a tournament fighter experiment, the messy prequel that still mattered. Also, small modern irony, the collection itself launched to a bit of a rough start, people complaining about input lag and online issues. So Mythologies is back in the spotlight inside a package that is also catching heat for field problems. Mortal Kombat history really is a circle. But even with that, the net effect is simple. Mythologies is not revived as a beloved classic. It is revived as a thing people can finally play again without hunting down dusty hardware or questionable ROM sites. The franchise is basically saying, yeah, we know this one is awkward. Still part of the family, though. That's enough of terrible games for today. If you're looking for something good now, watch the video on Witcher 3 next.